Hello and welcome everybody that has joined us today for our webinar Lessons Learned Developing a Smart Meter. Thank you that you came. We have a very interesting panel here together with one Daniel Kumolafe, the co-founder and CEO of First Electric, and Michel Friepat, the CTO of Solarly. Together, we will walk you a bit through our three organizations that we are representing here. And then we will have a short introduction by Daniel about the smart meter project and why it was developed and some technical specifications on it. And then later, the most important part, the lessons learned about developing a smart meter for energy access companies and practitioners. And last but not least, we will try to answer your questions, which you are able to send all the time throughout the chat. So make sure if you have any questions along the way, post a question in the chat, which you will find on the right side. And we will try to make sure to answer all of those, or at least as many as we can. So let me start with a short presentation of NAccess. Why does NAccess support open source projects? So at NAccess, we have seen that a lot of organizations, companies, nonprofits, and other organizations present in the sector use a lot of their scarce funds to develop software or hardware which is required for their operations. However, a lot of these developments are often just baseline infrastructure that is required and doesn't make them their outstanding business model. So instead of actually focusing on reaching more end customers by a redefined business model or the very particular solution, they end up reinventing the wheel of solutions that are already available by other companies that have been developed or that are available off the shelf. So that's how NAccess helps about open source. We support the identification and the development of open source innovations. For example, the smart meter, about which we are talking here today, but also many others. Secondly, we curate a repository of high quality open source innovations that can be used by anybody in the energy access sector or outside the energy access sector, and make sure they are being up to date and get evolved as the sector also evolves. And lastly, we do a large work of promotion around these innovations so that sector stakeholders get aware about the existence and the benefit of these innovations, and particularly also about the power of open source. And that's one of the reasons why you are today here with us joining this webinar. So let me hand over to Daniel, who will give you a short intro about First Electric.
Thanks, Vivian, for that great remark. First Electric is a renewable energy company. We're on a mission to make electricity accessible and available to people in underserved and unserved communities, okay? We truly believe that energy can empower people, and our vision is to empower people through electrification. And we do this by providing affordable electricity to people in remote communities, in the rural space, and also in the urban areas. So the main reason why, being true to our mission of making electricity affordable, I'm just going to explain how we started the smart meter project, right? So we explored several solutions of providing energy access. One of it was outright purchase of solar solutions, lease to own, where people pay in installments towards the ownership. And we found that, especially in Nigeria, where the GDP per capita is around $2,000 per person, it's almost impossible for majority of the population to afford to purchase a solar solution outrightly, and also even via lease to own. And from the focus groups we conducted and also the pilots we ran, we found that the number one reason for people not transitioning to affordable, to sustainable energy was affordability. And people just really wanted to focus on doing what they do. For example, we spoke to a business person who wanted to focus on just running his business. We spoke to a barber as well who just wanted to focus on barbering customers and expected electricity to be available whenever he needed it. And they were also willing to pay, a reasonable fee for that service. And for us, that was the genesis of why we landed on energy as a service as being the least having the least barrier to adoption. Okay, and of course, with energy as a service, we need to ensure the customers pay for only what they consume, and also on the developer side, we need to make sure that we get revenue for what we provide. Okay, and the smart meter does that very beautifully. But then we went out to search for what smart meters would be best suited for this application, right? We scouted around several vendors. I mean, you know most of the usual suspects in the industry, and we found that some of them didn't have the features we wanted, and they mostly insisted on buying a significant MOQ, and they tied us into a subscription model where we have to pay like a fee per user per month, which ended up to be quite significant in a year period, for example. And for a startup like us, this was a significant amount of money we just didn't want to devote to this, to tying up to that solution. So we thought to ourselves, is it possible to make a smart meter and make a platform that will be more or less free to use? And yeah, so we had the idea. We found N-Access, we pitched it to them, and the rest, they say, is history. The support has been great, and I'm really happy to speak about the details of the smart meter in the later slides. So I'll stop here and I'll hand over to Michel for his introduction.
Okay. Thank you, Vivian and Daniel. Can you go to the next slide, please, Vivian? Yeah, so hi everybody, and here it's Michel Fripia. I'm CTO of Solarly. I will be presenting to you our own company and how we got inside this adventure together with First Electric. You can go to the next slide. So Solarly is manufacturing, distributing, and financing solar solution in Cameroon. So yeah, our mission, like I guess a lot of the crowd today, is to unlocking energy access for economic growth to Central Africa, and thanks to innovation, green innovation. So in 2018, we started Solarly by designing and manufacturing our own solar home system, the Solarly box. So the Solarly box the purpose is that it would be more modular and more powerful than the Pico Solar existing on the market at that time in Cameroon. It must be connected for monitoring and also for payment plans. And today we have installed more than 1,000 units, 2,000 produced. So actually 1,000 of the units are shipped out to Cameroon at the moment. So that's on one side. On another side, we are a distributor. We have developed a strong distribution network in Cameroon with a team of 40 people, of sales agent technicians, and we are in 4 different regions of Cameroon. And on top of that, we have the financing solutions that permits us to put the pay-as-you-go model, enabling mobile money, and permits to do remote activation, deactivation our station. But 2 years ago, we started to get quite frustrated of not fulfilling really the needs of all our clients, mostly because of the range of our power. So between 100 and 300 watts, and also we realized we were not really replying to all the productive use activities that we could find on the rural areas. And so the solution was to to make standardized AC packs from 600 to 4,800 watt peak. But the challenge was there. So how to make it pay-as-you-go enable, and that's how we started to do a make or buy analysis, seeing if we should make the new product like Daniel did, or actually buying from the existing market. What we found out is that we had three solutions. First, buying specific devices from manufacturers, so some kind of inverters with pay-as-you-go embedded in the product, which was for us a bit too locked in and not sufficiently flexible. So we put that aside. We also have tested an AC switch from Innovex. Innovex, a really good product, but the problem we had is that in the Cameroonian context, the 2G network is really not stable enough, and we had to get a fallback solution like a keypad. And another problem that we had is that we have already implemented PayGops for our operations and for credit management, and the Innovex was coming together with their hardware, a software solution, so that was doing double work for us, and we didn't want to go in that way. And another solution that came along beginning of this year is the solution of SolarWorks and Victron that made a Paygo dongle. That seems to be an interesting solution also for that sector. But before that, you can go. Yeah, before that we discussed with Enaccess, and we saw that they were working with First Electric on this open smart meter. And after discussion, we were like, okay, that might be interesting to merge two technologies. So the open smart meter together with a really successful technology, which is Open Paygo token, and make the open smart meter 2.0 compatible with AC standalone installations. So that's how we got inside the project.
Great, thank you, Michel, and thank you both for the intros and your track records of your companies, and also how you got interested in developing or adapting and adopting the open smart meter. Now we have mentioned a lot the smart meter, and I think our crowd would be happy to learn a bit more about the smart meter. And so, Daniel, I will leave the stage for you for your intro and presentation of the smart meter, a bit more into detail. And Michel and I will leave you alone for some minutes with Daniel and come back later to discuss and share the lessons learned.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay, so let's get to the details. The open smart meter was designed with the customers in mind, right? And it was also designed to meet the specific requirements and needs of energy providers, energy developers, okay? And I've just highlighted here the key features that basically make the open smart meter stand out. This is version 1.0. Closer to the end of this presentation, I will also talk about the new developments we're making in version 2.0 that has way more features than this limited list currently showing on the screen now. So one thing which was very important was that for the smart meter to be GSM or Wi-Fi enabled. Basically, we're able to, from a developer standpoint, we're able to monitor energy consumption, voltage, power, faults, and any trigger events remotely from our offices. As you know, most of these smart meters will be installed in mostly rural environments, which are pretty remote from the city. So we needed to get a robust GSM or wireless connectivity. Another thing that was quite important was the accuracy of the meter. So it had to be a class 1 accuracy, basically, and to ensure transparency that we're not billing customers way more than what they're consuming, and also we're not getting revenue less than what we provide. Okay, so one very beautiful technology for the communication is the Cicada GSM and Wi-Fi module, which interestingly N-Access also supported during the development. So instead of creating a new communication module, we designed the Open Smart Meter to be compatible with the Cicada Wi-Fi and GSM modules that were developed by Okra Solar. So that's one of the features. It's compatible with Cicada Wi-Fi and GSM, and also it offers remote monitoring of parameters, energy, voltage, current, fault events, etc. And it's easily integratable with Paystack or any kind of payment solution that is available in your country. So it could be Stripe, it could be Paystack, it could be Monify, it could be MoneyPoint. So what this does is once the payment provider sends a signal or acknowledgement that payment is successful, what the Open Smart Meter would do, which will generate a token, and that token automatically goes into the smart meter to activate the credit that the user purchases. Okay, so all this is it happens in an instant and is all automatic. We also have a redundant feature that if for whatever reason there is network connectivity issues, the Open Smart Meter is also equipped with a keypad where the user would see the token on the screen or receive it by SMS and can manually key in the 20-digit token, and that meter would then be activated to reflect the credit purchase. So it has basically a remote over-the-air top-up and then also a manual top-up using the keypad. And of course, we designed the enclosure to be IP51, so to protect it against weather challenges. And all of these are all available on the GitHub website that has all the design files. So you can basically go there and have all the look at the source codes, the website codes, everything is all available, and it's available for free, thanks to the support of N-Access. So, I mean, next slide, I'll just talk about some of the key technical features of the smart meter. For example, class 1 accuracy, IB max and IMAX of 550. In terms of the operating voltage, it's designed to be used in Nigeria, so that's 230 volts AC plus or minus 5%. The meter constant is basically 1,000 impulses per minute, and this is also very important in terms of calibration using the RRS 232. And in terms of operating frequency, similar to for West Africa, it's 50 hertz, so it's compatible, right? And in terms of power consumption, we designed it to not consume more than 2 watts when it's in operation, and have very, very low starting current. In terms of protection, like I mentioned before, the IP51. And in terms of energy measurement, of course, it measures the fundamental energy and energy duty harmonics as well. So there's some very interesting features that make it functional and that makes it function properly. For example, we have a real-time clock, RTC, which basically provides dates, time per second throughout the lifetime of the meter, and that is also supported by a battery. So when the meter is powered on for the first time, it knows exactly what day it is, what year it is, and this is very useful for real-time monitoring and for billing purposes as well. Okay, it also has a non-volatile memory, and so basically all the energy and data being captured is stored for a limited period, and the meter is powered from the power supply. So basically, we have a battery, but the battery is majorly to power the control system. But the meter itself, once you plug it into your AC output line, it takes power from the AC output line to power the meter itself. In terms of display, so right now we have the LCD display on the meter itself. Another feature which we're talking about, which I'll talk about in the future and very soon, is basically having 2 separate modules, one for the UI, one for the user inputting the keypad, and the meter itself will be separate, and that will be located in another location. Just quickly, I want to introduce, this is, if you can see this, the image on the background, this is what we actually produced from the support of N-Access. You can see the keypad here. We can see some LEDs, and the LCD screen, the keypad, and this is basically what we developed. So for future developments, based on our own experience and also from feedback from other energy developers and customers, We're planning to work on an SMD surface mount device type instead of the design methodology which we followed right now, which was through hole. This is basically to allow the open smart meter to be designed for mass manufacturing. This is quite important because it would also reduce the efforts in terms of calibration of the meter, because it will be already calibrated and ready to mass manufacture. So this is one of the developments we're working on. Like I mentioned on the previous slide, we're working on splitting the meter to have the meter and the user interface unit separate. This is very useful to prevent tampering. So what will, in a mini grid site, for instance, the meter itself would be on a pole, which will be pretty high up, out of reach of people. And then the user interface unit would be located inside a house or inside the premises, where the user can interact with the meter and not basically tamper with the meter itself. To also reduce cost of data, we're implementing a LoRa wide area network methodology for communication, where maybe every 10 or so open smart meter would be like a data concentrator, and then the meters would communicate with themselves using a LoRa wide area network. This would help us to reduce the cost of the meter and also the cost of data that is being consumed by the meter and during the network. So these are kind of the key development plans, and I just introduced very quickly the key features of the meter. Of course, if there are questions, we're very happy to take some more questions on the chat. But I think right now, Vivian and Michelle, you can come back. We're going to talk about the lessons learned in development of the smart meter.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, for this explanation and presentation of the smart meter itself. So I think now everybody also has a more specific picture what we're actually talking about and what this lessons learned we will talk about now are concerning. And yeah, I'm always happy and great to see like everything that has been achieved in this project and this collaboration with you, and I'm also excited about the further steps that you mentioned on the further work that we want to do. And again, to everybody, it's already meant, it's open source, so the idea is that everybody can and should use it and change it and contribute to it. If you see, oh, this feature is not exactly mine, I need other features, so then just take it and tweak it instead, starting from zero, and contribute to our common open source project, because that's what a lot of energy access practitioners will need. So as mentioned from Daniel, remember that there's a chat. You can make any questions there. And now let's come up with the first lesson, and I'm happy to know your insights, Daniel, and your Michelle, about the lesson. And that's not a lesson we have invented. This is actually based on discussions we had with Michelle and Daniel in the past. Don't be scared of open source. Harness its power. So a lot of people often are scared about, oh, open source, and I can't benefit from it. I can't earn money, and I'm just sharing my efforts with everybody. So particularly, Daniel, what is your standpoint here? Because I know also you had to get to know more the power of open source and how this can help you in your development. So happy to hear from you your point of view on that.
Yeah, great question. And like you mentioned, there's an innate response of like, I don't want to share my IP because my intellectual property is everything I have. If I share my IP, then what do I have? But we went through that journey as well. And then we came to the realization that what really sets you apart from the competitor is not really your idea. There's an abundance of ideas, right? But what really determines winners or people that become really successful is being able to execute on that idea, right? Being able to do your logistics, customer acquisition, and all these many things that are involved in running a business, right? And if we didn't make that transition to make this open source, maybe perhaps the idea we had of the meter would still be in our head today and not be realized. And we definitely, not just getting the funding we did from N-Access, we also received valuable feedback from members of the community that also helped us to improve the quality of the meter which we designed. So open sourcing, for me, is very important for innovation because it allows collaboration between key stakeholders and also allows feedback, right? And for me, this is, and allows further collaboration even after the project is done. For example, now Solarly is working on adopting the product and we're even getting more feedback. So it wasn't like an instant change of mind, but it was a journey we had. And I'm very, very, very happy we were able to see the value of open source and how that can be of value to our idea. And that's why we definitely made that switch. And we're very happy we did to make this open source smart meter.
Yeah, exactly. I would just want to add maybe one thing on that is that we are actually on the same boat on this challenge of to bring energy access. And yeah, I don't think I think having a technical solution is one point, and it's actually not that easy to have something that is stable, etc. And but I think the biggest challenge is to find the right business model to be on site to have all the challenges of the distribution, and we are on a race to solve this major challenge of this world. And I think having sharing this technical knowledge will help us all in this goal.
Great. Thank you both. And I mean, that's great to hear, and I just could echo it, and that's why we exist now. So you're basically just underpinning the mission of N-Access, that we want the sector to collaborate on the infrastructure that is required and build innovative and great business model around it to actually get us in an effective and efficient way to SDG 7, and not by constantly reinventing the same solution again and again, but leveraging the wisdom of the crowd that we have together. So another lesson that had been mentioned, that we have heard from the discussions with you too, is you have to know exactly how much can you develop in-house, make this decision. So understand what makes sense to do in-house and what not. So could you maybe, from your experience with this particular Open Smart Meter project, Daniel, could you provide us a bit more on insights, what that meant in your particular case, where you had the pain points and the learnings here?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Vivian. So, I mean, sometimes as engineers, we're very passionate about our ideas and we just try to do everything ourselves, right? Not really the best idea, to be honest, right? For one concrete example was in the development of the power supply module to the smart meter. There are several off-the-shelf power supply components that we could have purchased to power the meter, okay? But we decided to manufacture our own power supply from scratch using an SMPS design. This was very, very complicated and it took us a lot of time. And now it's even more problematic in adoption. If someone wants to adopt the Open Smart Meter, now they have to more or less make their own power supply from scratch. So we're basically cascading the problem we experienced when we could have easily just purchased a very standardized power supply module and integrated that into this Open Smart Meter. That would have probably been a better use of time and resources. And I think in hindsight, knowing what you should focus on and knowing what you should leverage, what is existing, it's a very, very good decision to make. And it's something you need to spend time on. Focus on the area of your strength and what you're really good at and what you can leverage on, then leverage as much as possible. I think in hindsight, that is something that we think is a lesson, and moving forward, we'll definitely carry that analysis more thoroughly in further development. Trying to make everything from scratch is definitely not the best idea, especially for an open source project, because everybody then would need to also make everything from scratch, and then it makes the work more difficult. So that's one of the lessons learned. I'm happy to share. I don't know. So, Michelle, did you have any ideas or basically any experience working with our products and any challenges you also face? You know, it would be interesting to get your insight.
Yeah, at the moment we really focused on the firmware, right? I know some work has been done also on clarifying the um, the way to produce it on the BOM and etc. But we at the moment haven't started to work on the hardware side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I just want to add also from our particular experience at NXS, like our view here, not only on the open smart meter, but generally on this project, and also because we stand for open source and so on. I just wanted to mention we also had to learn sometimes that we do all stand for open source and energy access because we believe we need less replication and more efficient efforts and so on. But that also means sometimes make the decision. There are certain pieces in the hardware development, for example, that are off the shelf and that are proprietary and they are just perfect. So you don't need to just reinvent them just because of making them open source. If there is no need to do something new and open source because it's extremely good, extremely robust, it's extremely cheap and available, then yeah, we would not push for, or not again, we might have done that in the past, but it's also a learning to say, no, that doesn't make sense. That's exactly what we want to avoid. We don't just want to develop something because it's open source. We want to develop something open source because it makes sense, because there's a use for it to be open source. And so this decision, like projecting on open source projects, is yeah, I want to echo that from this perspective. You don't necessarily to have to make it open source just for the sake of it. And this actually applies also to software. I mean, if there are software solutions that are good, that are cheap, that are maybe even for free, or they're very cheap and they're very efficient, yeah, we might not need to replicate it for energy access just in an open source manner. Yeah, to underpin your point. I think another very interesting lesson that had been mentioned from Daniel in the discussions on which we actually decided to make this webinar is think from start to finish. I will not say much on that. I'm pretty happy to let you share with the crowd what that meant in your particular case.
Yeah, sure, Vivian. So thinking from start to finish, sometimes you can make your best effort, but if you at least identify a process, like you really need to think of everything from start to finish, maybe you have the likelihood of catching as many things as possible. There would always be some surprises, but if you have it at the back of your mind to imagine and to go walk through the process, it definitely helps to avoid surprises. For example, in our case, we were so focused on making the meter accurate and work functionally that we totally forgot about the enclosure until the end, right? Where the meter was done, the PCB was manufactured, and they were like, okay, well, we're not going to install a PCB by itself in a customer site. And then I was like, oh, but during the project definition, we actually did not talk about an enclosure. And then we had to spend time developing a 3D model and, making sure the PCB fits within the design and finding a vendor that could, print the 3D design and all of that stuff. That was a miss on our side because we did not really think of start to finish in terms of not just what's important for us, what's also important for the customer and how that customer is going to benefit from the project, okay? The kind of IP rating the meter should be and everything else in between, okay? So thinking from, and also one very important thing was the calibration of the meter, okay? Because as you know, once you make a meter like this, you need to calibrate for accuracy to ensure the meter is actually, measuring something the right way. And we didn't realize that if you want to get a NEMS, the local certification from the local authorities, there's a particular way they want to test your meter for accuracy. And it has to do with the the pulse testing, right? It's called the optical pulse, right? So we didn't have the specialized machinery to carry out that calibration in-house. And we basically had to improvise and write to a lab located in Lagos that had those machines. And of course, because of IP issues, they didn't let us go into the lab. So they just took the meter from us and then tried to calibrate it and then give us a report. And it was very, very tedious. I think if we had really considered every single detail as much as possible, we would have realized very earlier on in the lifetime of the project that we were going to encounter challenges with the calibration and maybe have prepared better. So thinking from start to finish would really help you to save time, reduce surprises, and this is something that's very important in doing any further development, not just open source, but generally in product development.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, and great experience. I think that something that we generally should do in a lot of projects of our life, but I think particularly in hardware development, possibly in software development as well, the pain might be a bit less if you don't do it. At least the cost pain in terms of materials and so on. But still, I mean, if you dedicate a lot of time to it and think about the end, can also be very painful. I don't know, Michelle, anything to add on this learning from your side? Otherwise, we have the very interesting next and last learning, which I think
let's go for the
all
lesson
open source
4
crowds will share with us. Yeah, the lesson 4. Documented protocols like your life depends on it. I think people used to open source and having worked with open source, having done their own open source projects or try to use other open source projects will perfectly relate to that. But I want to give it not only this open source aspect, also generally, if it's not open source and you have to hand over within a company, also on documentation is also crucial. Or within a company, or if you want to partner also, then you can still decide what to share. But yeah, this is, we believe it's of immense importance, not only for open source, but I let Daniel and Michelle talk to that more specifically regarding this project.
I can go first. So documentation, this was our first open source project, right? So we had a lot of things in our mind and we assumed people could read our minds, right? So, and that is something you should never assume, because especially when you're doing open source, whoever is adopting your solution has no idea about the headspace you were in when you were making the designs and the projects. So every single step has to be documented, every single step. And not just documented, but documented in a way that you're assuming the person reading it has no clue what you're talking about. I need to explain in detail in a way that they would understand easily. And this was a journey for us. It's not something we got instantly. We had to do quite a lot of back and forth, and thanks with the support of N-Access to give us huge, valuable feedback. And also from the early adopters also said, hey guys, can you further explain what you meant by this and how can we improve the documentation? One thing we also did was rely on documentation structures from very established companies and look through, for example, API documents. What is an API document supposed to look like? What are the key elements of an API document? So we looked at a few reputable companies and we got some ideas of how to draft or write a proper API documentation. But documentation is everything, especially in an open source project. But I think Michelle probably had the interesting experience of trying to go through our documentation and understand what we did.
Yeah, exactly.
So it would be interesting to get on how that was.
Yeah, exactly. As we were the first one to dig into the work, and that was indeed a huge work to make already a smart meter that is stable. The first version that is stable, that must be also a huge work. And so, like always, I think in hardware or in IT, developers it's not the best. It's not the more fun part of doing the documentation. But of course, in open source, it's mandatory. Yeah, and in this case, as we were working on the firmware specifically, we had to do a first phase of refactoring the code, and I think that helped that a third party does it, because that proves some way that if you do yourself the refactoring, that means you understand clearly the code, and that was a good communication between NXS and First Electric to make that refactoring. Uh, yeah, now I guess the firmware is a bit more understandable. Um, yeah, that's on my side, I think. Maybe yeah,
Yeah, thank
one
you.
other point maybe is the GitHub portal. This is a tool that our developers in Cameroon were not really used to, and GitHub is a good way to collaborate. And so we had some kind of a learning curve on how to collaborate together with an access on that tool. Sometimes just our developers were going too far, doing too many issues on the same branch, and then we had to go in forward, back and forward on sometimes frustration because some work was not well done, not clear. So that was a bit of the first phase was a bit complex to understand that way of working with GitHub.
Yeah, and to come in here and add a bit on what you both said. And I mean, particularly if it's a first open source project, and for that being the first open source project of First Electric, I think you've done a great job. You were obviously not able to do it like an open source like Geeky doing it for 20 years, but our learning here was like, okay, we need to provide more guidance about open source documentation, because that's what we stand for. So the role of NXS would be like, you have to, and it's the same case for Solarly as well. No, I mean, there were people not even used to GitHub. So our role as somebody, as an enabler that wants to push the adoption. So we need also to say, we know documentation is important and we require documentations and open source documentation, open source license. But we, as an open source expert in the sector, have the role to not only push for it, but also provide the additional guidance and structure in open source documentations. It's what we learned from this project, and also took more and more forward to other projects, like streamlining the documentations, making them more standardized, easier to understand structure. And yeah, so it's a multi-learning project, and I mean, that's the idea, and that's the beauty about open source. We can all learn together, and we can share our good and bad experience to avoid people doing the same mistakes, and by that all working more efficient. So again, here the invitation to you: if you see anything that you believe is not well done, both in the documentation or in the project itself, tell us, or in the best case, improve it, make it better, and make a commit, make a pull request, and then we can merge it, and together we can make the project better. So that's all what it is about. Now we want to come from the lessons learned that we have discussed here. And obviously there are more lessons, but we had to focus. We just have limited time to discuss lessons, but also by answering questions and going more into a discussion, we might also cover some other lessons. Is this together, I mean, that's the first, or together with the open BMS that we have, just like more hardware focused open source project. I mean, we also have a comms module, which is actually used in the smart meter. But open source has proven quite successful already on several fronts in software, not only for energy access, which there's the Open Paygo token that we have funded, which had like a sector-wide impact by making the sector more efficient. Now we are trying to push more open source hardware also in the sector, and we're still trying to understand how can we make adoption here easy, because it's way different to just download a source code and deploy a source code on your instance, on your computer, and downloading an app or installing an app and doing some tweaks in the code, or actually having design files, production files, bill of material, and design, actually manufacturing the hardware, plus the firmware, which is always part of it. So we are still in the process to understand better how can we the open source hardware best leverage for the sector. So if there are any suggestions or ideas or questions how this can best be done, we are happy to hear that. That said, now that's one of the reasons why we are doing this webinar. We want to understand more and share our experience and understand more what the sector stakeholders think about this hardware project, which now makes us talk about the questions that have been come from the crowd. Remember that still keep on posting your questions in the chat. I will read out the first question now from Pablo Rodriguez. Thank you for your question. I think they are in the other order. I start with the one from Maria, so because that was the first question. Are there any plans to have samples of the open smart meter available for testing purposes? So I will start answering it, maybe, Daniel, and then I leave it to you. Actually, this goes a bit in the direction that Daniel said earlier, that the SMD design that we are wanting to do as a next step for allowing more mass factoring, because the through-hole design is particularly great for prototyping phases, also makes the open source approach easier because it's easier to make modifications and testing on things. On the other side, it's much more workload to actually produce it because it requires manual soldering on several parts. So now to answer the question, yes, there is the plan to get a batch of some smart meters produced that then can be purchased and allow people to run their own tests. However, we would prefer to first do the SMD design to ease this process of having an easier production to then share them for testing. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also thinking we can do one step before that, right? There are a few components which are, like I mentioned, problematic, like the power supply. So we are thinking of replacing that power supply module with a standard off-the-shelf module, and then making that available so on request. So if somebody wants open smart meter, we will be willing to basically take a request, of course, at a fee, to produce it using standard off-the-shelf components that are easily available, and make that available to the user. But like you mentioned, once the SMD design is finalized, that could probably be on Seed Studio, and it could be easily manufactured. Yeah.
Great. I think let's go to the next question, which is how many layers has the PCB? This is a design question which I can't answer.
No, it's a two-layer PCB design. So it's if you go on the GitHub, on the first page, maybe we should also share a link to that. You can see all the details of the PCB, but just to answer the question directly, is a two-layer PCB design.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Now let us see the next question, which is, let me see. Are there any specific parts, mostly hardware, that you would recommend developing in-house? That wouldn't recommend developing in-house, sorry. If it's a bit based on our discussion we had earlier to make the smart decisions. So do you have any?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, for example, the GSM module. So we would leverage on Okra, Cicada. Okay, so we don't recommend, because that's already open source. We don't recommend developing that in-house. Power supply module, we don't recommend developing in-house. What else? I think those are the two things that come to mind right now. But remember, the core of what we're doing is the system design for the smart meter. That one has to be developed in-house because that's the value add, right? But then like loose functional components like power supply, communication module, if you find something that is reliable off the shelf, there is no need to design those ones from scratch. You can just use them.
Great. I don't know, maybe not particularly on a smart meter, but as you have also developed technology on your side, Michal, I don't know, do you have maybe a generic answer to that or specific to a product that you have developed?
No, I was actually thinking to the question also on our Solari box. What has been what we added the keypad, and that was based on the OpenPaygo token, and that's helped a lot. But again, this is an access open source library. I was thinking of something else, but I don't have like right now in the top of my head.
Okay.
Vivian,
no, all good.
I'd also like to add, we're also considering right now to implement the time-based token system, because what we have right now is the energy-based, okay? So for example, we're going to leverage on not just only hardware, also software and firmware. So we're going to leverage on what's already available from a time-based system in the further developments, okay? So whatever is available out there that is robust, is functioning, be it hardware or software, no need to develop it, in-house.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's here the integration of the Paygo token that we have here, but while the OpenPaygo token will be tweaked in energy base, but that's again like this, don't start developing your own token system. Also, let's use what is out there and implement it in whatever we have. I see here a question that's marked as answered. Do you use a specific methodology to develop a new version of product? I'm not exactly sure what is meant by this question, but maybe here the developing companies, Michel and Daniel, maybe you have an answer to that.
Yeah, maybe, and this is something it could be interesting to explore, is to have like some kind of guidelines on how to develop open source. I think that would be maybe a good idea, that an access like gathers all the guidelines, all the good lesson learned for having our team, like our developer team, that are not used to open source, not used to maybe collaboration remotely, to get on stage quickly or more easily.
That's a good request to us. I mean, that would be particularly on open source development of new versions on product. I don't know if this question was only focusing that, but I will take definitely that on our side. And it goes a bit in this direction of us now providing more guidance in how to document, at least. Not necessarily on how to specifically plan the development, but at least the documentation process. That's something where we have already now more templates and more guidance on how to do it, and do particular sessions dedicated to developers and provide ongoing support in the development process. I would now go to the next question, which is a tricky one, but do you have a timeline when the SMD PCB will be done? I leave it first to you, Daniel. I know we are together in this boat fighting that, but
yeah. So hopefully, touch wood, we're looking at the first half of 24. I know that sounds like a long time, but anything worth doing is worth doing well, because we have a few new features we want to implement that would make it more practicable to use the smart meter. So we're looking at the first half of next year when the SMD version will be available.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I mean, you said like it sounds far, but I mean, every development takes time, and and remember that's an open source project, and it requires commitment, but in the best case, not only commitment by the ones developing it initially and the ones supporting it initially. So if this is something it's of interest for you and you're happy to collaborate on it, I will not stop inviting you to approach us or First Electric or Solarly in their journey to contribute and help in this process. So, and that will benefit you, but that will also benefit others. And you will benefit from our work and the wisdom of the crowd. And then it will be faster. And now this is again a question to you, Daniel. Is there a web portal that the meters reports to?
Yeah, so we've used a generic server right now, which is on the GitHub, a free server. But you can, and we've put the codes on how to set up your back ends, right? But you can use any website, any server, and basically implement the codes on that server, and then the smart meter would communicate to that server. Okay, of course, each user has a different ways they manage their servers in their company. But what we've done is we made all the codes available, the HTML files for the design and everything. It's all available. But what you would need to basically host that code somewhere where it could basically work for you. Okay, I hope I answered the question. There is no specific server. There is a server, but that's just an example. But you can use your own server and implement the codes on your server, and it should work fine.
And if I may add here, thanks. I mean, as I said, it's available. There's an open source solution, a generic, easy to use solution. But again, as it's open source, you can also integrate it in your own platform if you have one, which you have developed by your own, or if you're using any commercial one, thanks to the open API setup and the general open source spirit of this project, it's easily integratable, and that's their whole idea here. And in exchange to, for example, the commercial solutions, the proprietary solutions that were mentioned earlier, that often tie you in their own IoT ecosystem and their own platform. So you have here the freedom to either use the one which is provided within this Open Smart Meter project or use any other. With, of course, some development work would then be required from your own.
Yeah, maybe one point also.
So great, I think.
Yep.
Go ahead.
That with the OpenPayGo token, we will be also able to use the portal of Angaza, PayGops, PayG to be compatible with the software, with the hardware.
Yeah, actually, that's a great example. Actually, this integration and adaptation work that Solarly is doing here is a great example of crowd contribution that actually leads you to be able to use a large variety of providers. Great to see we have managed to end.
There's a question.
There's another new question
from Isiaka. Says he would like to contribute, but had no success reaching First Electric.
Oh.
So
let's Daniel, if you can answer it very quickly, because then we have to close the session. But I give you 30 seconds.
My email address, and then you can reach out to me personally. Okay, no problem.
Here, I just brought it up the screen. It's a perfect closing of this session, actually. Want to contribute to the Open Smart Meter? Reach out to us. So actually, you made the question before we had time to bring up the slide, Isaac. Here you find all our contacts for access our homepage, for First Electric, the homepage, and Solarly, the homepage, and also our email addresses where you can reach us, and even phone numbers if you want to use WhatsApp or any other maybe open source solution instead to contact us. There are numbers. So that's how you can contact any of us directly. Or also there's the GitHub repository where you can go and find out, can raise issues, commits, and become a contributor directly. But if you want to further discuss, firstly, here are the way how to get in touch with us. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here, for attending this webinar. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Michelle, for making this possible, sharing your experience, and providing the sector with more knowledge sharing and more know-how on how to move forward on smart meter development in particular, and also generally open source developments for the sector. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available. So thank you and goodbye to everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.